Welcome. My name is Jose Melendez, Campaign Director for the Taxpayer Protection Project at TPPF, and today we're talking about taxpayer empowerment. Specifically, we're going to zero in on local government spending and tax reform. For several sessions, the state has worked to lower your taxes by passing tax relief measures at the legislature to then send that down to our local governments. But your property tax bills continue to go up. Why is that? Today we're going to find out. I'm delighted to introduce my guest, a freedom fighter and Bexar County Commissioner, Grant Moody. Grant, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Jose.
So, Commissioner Moody, in your capacity as a local official, you've typically been out there engaging and advocating at the Texas legislature. Tell us more about your experience advocating, engaging the legislature, but most importantly, tell us what you're most passionate about, and what would you say to local officials who are looking to get engaged at the legislature?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Texas Public Policy Foundation is such an important organization to the future of our state, and you've done great work and continue to do great work. You know, there were two bills that we had pushed, both in the House and the Senate, in the state legislative session. The first one had to do with taxpayer funds being used for immigrant legal defense services. These were on the civil side. Obviously, you have constitutional rights to criminal defense. But really, if we break it down, these were taxpayer funds to defend immigrants from deportation who were in our jail, who had committed crimes against taxpayers and citizens in this state. It seemed like such a no-brainer and a slam dunk for me when you think about conservative policy. We made some great progress on that bill, made it through committee. Unfortunately, it did not become law. We're going to continue to push that forward.
And one note, is this because this was an issue going on back in San Antonio or Bexar County?
Exactly, okay. It was. And, you know, the sad thing is I just got my agenda briefing for next week, and this is coming back to Commissioner's Court. They will ask for funding for both our Managed Assigned Counsel and for our Public Defender's Office to have additional funds, approximately $1 million to each one of those programs going forward for another FY. And that is providing legal defense for illegal immigrants that are in our criminal justice system. And let me be clear. Universal representation, meaning no one could tell me that a murderer or a rapist in our jail would not be defended or have access to those taxpayer dollars. And that's completely unacceptable in Texas.
Excellent. Let's shift over just a bit to talk about local government. So it is said that the size and sustainability of our local government debt is completely out of control, and that is a concern shared amongst conservatives. Do you think their worries are legitimate, or do you think these claims are unfounded?
Well, I think they're legitimate. I think that, you obviously start at the top with the federal debt, surpassing $37 trillion. People they can't fathom what that actually means for them and their family. But you take that down to the local level, Bexar County, between principal and interest, has about $3.7 billion in debt. We have the second highest debt load of any county in the state of Texas and the highest debt per capita of any county in the state of Texas. I've been very clear, if we don't want to be downgraded as a county with the ratings agencies, we need to take a step back. We need to start paying off some of that debt, be slower to issue new debt going forward, or we will not have the ability to borrow funds in the future as a county, and we don't want to be there. Now, I will add on top of that, though, that as bad as that sounds for Bexar County, the city of San Antonio, between principal and interest, owes over $21 billion in debt. So you start adding all these numbers up on top of one another, there's a tremendous debt load that's being carried by taxpayers, in Bexar County, in the state of Texas, and country at large.
And to paint an even bigger picture, San Antonio and all our local municipalities, counties, every local jurisdiction, at this point in time, has eclipsed, in terms of local government debt, over $500 billion, which is a mind-blowing number.
Yeah.
And the biggest source of that is bonds. We have bond elections. And so that goes to my next question. Do you think there's a better way we can communicate these bond elections to the average citizen? Is there a way that we can should we be looking at moving these elections to a point in time where more folks can come out and express their concerns and address these issues?
Yeah, I think all those are options that should be on the table, whether it's changing when those elections can take place to make sure that more taxpayers are able to participate. There's discussions about setting a higher bar, for supermajorities on certain bond elections to make sure that, we're encumbering all of those taxpayers with that debt. That there's a high bar that needs to be reached in terms of the necessity of that debt being issued. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think you're spot on in terms of the communication and making sure that we engage voters. I think there's a lot of trepidation around, well, what happens if we vote this down and our, local ISD fails. Or we won't be able to, our schools are going to collapse, or, whatever the bond is about. We have to be able to, as taxpayers, ask the tough questions, like I do in Commissioner's Court, about do we need this and do we need it now? And I think that taxpayers have to have a better ability to understand like what those projects are and what the real necessities of the taxing entity are. And, I don't think you get that in most bond elections today.
Well, you're certainly a taxpayer champion to the folks in Bexar County. Along the same lines, let's talk about local government abuse, like instances where you've seen abuse. Specifically, talk to us and maybe give us some examples of redundant government programs and just waste that you've encountered.
Yeah, how much time do we have?
Give us a few.
Yeah, recently there was a energy assistance program that came up in Bexar County that Bexar County provides, overhead to. There's a similar city program. Mm-hmm. There's also a CPS, which is our utility provider. They have a program as well. So coming from a business background, coming from a standpoint of like, why do we have 3 redundant programs all providing the same thing? Why, if we believe as a court and there's political will to provide this, support out there to individual constituents, then why not roll that all into one program rather than having 3 different sets of overhead that the city's paying for, the county's paying for? And oh, by the way, if we just allowed CPS to reduce their rates overall, then there'd be less demand for that in the first place. So if you didn't know, 14% of all revenue from CPS, the utility provider, goes to the city of San Antonio. So they're taking money from CPS that's coming from individual citizens who are out there paying their utility bills. Then the city is providing a service through this utility assistance program that has a tremendous amount of overhead to then give some of that money back to those individuals that have utility bills, right? Instead of doing all of that additional overhead and waste within local government, just let CPS lower their utility costs for those individual ratepayers, and we could eliminate all that overhead simultaneously. Now, when it comes to other individual projects, I mean, some things are just like shocking to me. Mm-hmm. It seems like you can't build any construction project under $10 million today, which is crazy if you ask me. Animal control services. We recently built a new kennel animal control service facility. It was going to be $10 million. There were only going to be 100 kennels in that facility. You do the math, $100,000 per kennel, per animal in that facility. I mean, you can build starter homes for that amount, which was just shocking to me. And then, we had an urban farm that, listen, I grew up on a farm. I'm a big believer in the value of farming, but we're spending $10 million on this urban farm that, is an acre, not 10 acres, not 100 acres, not 1,000 acres, 1 acre, 220 feet by 220 feet. So the idea that we're going to put that kind of taxpayer funds into such a small plot. Combine that with the fact that the San Antonio Food Bank already has a farming operation for anybody who wants to be involved. The San Antonio Botanical Garden also has a similar program available for anyone who wants to be involved and learn about farming. You obviously have school programs around 4-H. So there's a lot of redundancy there, unnecessary spending. I try to push back on these things and call them out as I see them. But there's so many different projects like that pop up in local government. And, unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to push back. A lot of people don't want to say no. And, I think that's unfortunate for taxpayers.
Well, we certainly need more local officials shining a light on these issues so that the public knows. For a second, I do want to switch gears back to the legislature. So as you might be familiar with, during the regular session, the state legislature sent about $10 billion worth of tax relief down to local governments. But what we're seeing is that money is being intercepted by these local governments in the way of tax hikes, bond elections, and just spending sprees. How can we ensure that tax relief through legislative measures actually makes it down to taxpayers?
Well, I think that's a big concern. Ultimately, it comes down to taxpayers, citizens being more engaged on the local level, right? Through the last couple of years, I've talked about local elections matter, and I think people overlook them at their peril because so much of our spending, our property taxes comes through, local offices, your county, your city, your school district, right? So if people I went into a room at an event recently. I shouldn't have put everybody on the spot, but I asked anybody in that room to name who represented them on their local ISD. And not a single person could name who represented them on the school board.
Sure.
And that is 60 to 65% of your local property taxes. Everyone has an issue with the property taxes in Texas, but the people who are setting that tax rate, who are going forward with that level of taxation, they don't even know who those individuals are. So there has to be more of an understanding.
Gets to a very good point. You mentioned the school board sets the tax rate. I think a lot of folks have the misconception that the state sets the tax rate. To your point, it's the school board. And it's the government that's closest to you that the people theoretically should be more involved with.
They should be, and I think that's something we have to continue to preach and continue to push and encourage, because these local elections do matter, and those are the places where folks should be engaging to make sure that $10 billion tax cut makes it back into their families' bank accounts.
Finally, and last question. Our local governments are sending millions and millions of dollars to hire contract lobbyists here in Austin to advocate at the Capitol. Do you think that's a good return on investment for taxpayers?
I don't. I've been vocal about this since I was elected. I provided written testimony for Senator Mays Middleton. I know he's been leading the charge on the Senate side to get taxpayer-funded lobbying banned in the state of Texas. The thing is that we have the ability as elected officials to go ahead and come to the legislature and advocate on our own behalf. I've done that. I know my colleagues have done that in the past. I don't need a lobbyist to be able to set up a meeting with another elected official, number one. Number two, for large entities like Bexar County and others, we also have government affairs folks who are actual employees of the county that help manage this already. So again, it's another redundancy. So we have government affairs employees for the county, but then on top of that, we have contracted lobbyists. And so it's unnecessary. I don't think there's a good return on investment. And I think that ultimately it comes down to elected officials being more active and taking the time to come up to Austin or go up to DC and advocate on their constituents' behalf.
Well, Commissioner Moody, thank you for your service, and thank you for being such a great taxpayer champion.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the show.
Thanks for having me on. Enjoyed it.